Attention to go-go, baby!
If you've ever wondered what it would be like to be sucked inside of the silver screen and be given the role of a superhero, then the PS2 and GameCube classic Viewtiful Joe might serve as a nice outlet for that fantasy.
Hey, wait a minute. Am I inside the movie?
Viewtiful Joe is quite the underrated gem, as it takes a trip back to a more classical feel with some modern innovations. A 2D side-scroller beat-em-up adventure game would probably be the best way to describe it, but it isn't the way to describe Viewtiful Joe. Just from the mere look of it, you'd expect Viewtiful Joe to encompass all that it can in the spirit of Megaman or DuckTales, and it does. But the game holds so much more than the mere genre of those titles. Joe's repertoire includes a heroic arsenal of bombs, boomerangs in the shape of a V, and his trusty V-Watch, which grants Joe the majority of his powers. Much like the beloved Power Rangers of the 90s, once Joe dons his armor thanks to the technology of his wrist V-Watch, Joe becomes a master of time, space, and even movie effects, as he is able to speed up time, slow down, or even zoom in order to enhance his skills even further. Just be cautious of the VFX meter at the top of the screen, as it determines how much juice Joe has left for all these moves before he loses his armor and reverts back to a regular Joe. Along with this, a dodging mechanic which has been implemented adds a somewhat innovative dynamic to the combat system. Against the smaller enemies, it becomes the simple 1-2 strategy that allows you to stun and swat away the masses. And with slightly bigger foes, it becomes an integral part to gaining an advantage over them. All dodging is never timed the same, and usually needs to be backed up with both focus, skill, and anticipation. Carrying this combat concept, along with Joe's other time and space controlled abilities, and you've got a creative list of how Joe can avoid danger, tackle certain matchups, or defend himself against some of his nastier adversaries. The plot isn't all that original, as all it is your basic damsel in distress. The bad guy stole my girlfriend and he's hired a gauntlet of supervillains to try and stop me so that he can dominate the world. A very basic hero's plot isn't the best sounding when you try to clunk it up with the fact that Joe was just an average moviegoer who gets pulled into one of his favorite movies and becomes a souped-up hero himself. Fortunately, the plot isn't completely hampered with cliches thanks to Joe's wisecracking, high-spirited, and jaw-jacking personality and heroics. Take this alongside the legion of nefarious arch-nemeses who add a bit of comic relief and fun exchanges between the hero, which creates a nice sigh of relief in between brawls.
Ugh, what an idiot!
You best shut up, mate.
And with all basic storytelling aside, Viewtiful Joe still manages to tell an interesting tale of heroism and betrayal thanks to a couple plot twists here and there. From a visual perspective, it can be somewhat pleasing like eye candy to notice the game has taken a cel-shaded graphical approach to mimic that of a superhero comic book, which in itself sells when given the story and circumstances of the gameplay. It's colorful, it's bright, and it's simply mesmerizing. The only real downfall, however, can be the expressions and animated motions given off by the characters during certain scenes, as they do feel a bit stiff and robotic. But, overall, its look and artsy take on an everyday side-scroller beat-em-up with some fresh ideas only enhances this game's attraction a bit more. The only real issues with Viewtiful Joe is that surprises are few and far between in the narrative. If you're somebody who isn't a fan of all the tongue-in-cheek, playful attitudes that most of the characters exude, it can be a bit hard to take the story seriously in any way, shape, or form. It's obvious that its attention was pulled more towards the action and the gameplay, and while this would have been forgiving if this was still in the ye old days of Mega Man's prime, for example, it only detracts from the value of the game as a whole in today's standards. Not only that, but Viewtiful Joe can sometimes suffer from a balancing act in its difficulty. 1 second you'll be running over mobs of grunts like it's nothing, and in the next scene, you may be given just a tad far too many action stunts to do that Joe would need to hire a double. But let it be known that Viewtiful Joe is one of those games that does require some level of skill in order to play, and while the difficulty spikes are annoying and somewhat exhausting in some stages, it can be extremely satisfying to have finally learned how to get past a certain obstacle or enemy, which is reward enough to make this game beautiful.